it was on September 29th of 2010, with only 4 months left to graduate from the program, that SJVC decided to terminate me from their RT program via a notice of termination letter, which I was surprisingly made aware of on September 30th of 2010 from a fax that was sent by SJVC's Rancho Cucamonga campus director. This notice of termination said, and I quote, "Unfortunately, Mr. Scott did not meet today's, that is September 29th at 9 a.m. deadline and has been terminated. However, I immediately knew that I had never been informed about any such September 29th 9 a.m. deadline, or of even any criteria that I was supposed to comply with, to satisfy, as implied in the letter, in order to keep from being terminated by such deadline. For I was not warned about such deadline either verbally, by fax, by letter, by email, or even by certified mail. In other words, SJV just simply made this September 29th 9 a.m. deadline up out of thin air and then conveniently told me through their arbitrary notice of termination that I was terminated. Now, I obviously had inquired at the same time of SJVC at the same time about what the whole reason was as to why SJVC terminated me to begin with. And I'll get into that subject in just a moment here. But just to cover this deadline issue thoroughly right now, therefore, after I received this notice of termination, I immediately responded on that very same day, on September 30th of 2010, by way of emailing SJVC to tell them that at no time had I ever been given any kind of warning notice about any September 29th 9 a.m. deadline, as was mentioned in the campus director's notice of termination. And I therefore mainly requested that SJVC immediately reinstate me back into the program. However, there was absolutely no considerate immediate reply given by SJVC, and therefore obviously no intention by SJVC of reinstating me back into the program. None. Additionally, again, just to cover this deadline issue thoroughly enough here, I want to go ahead and fast forward just a bit from September 29th clear up to what happened on February 7th of 2011. Because it was on that day that I finally had the chance, along with my wife and my daughter, to meet and talk with SJVC's Rancho Cucamonga campus director, who had been directly responsible for having terminated me. The letter was from her. You see how it works is a program director of a particular college program can only recommend termination of a student, but it's only the campus director who has the final authority to actually terminate a student. And considering that fact, please note here how that I had never personally met with the campus director before in my life, and neither had she ever met with me before, just terminated me. So at this February 7th meeting of 2011 meeting, I spoke with her about this September 29th 9 a.m. deadline issue that she herself had brought up in her notice of termination letter, wherein I then asked her directly, could you please provide me with a copy of the warning notice that SJVC should have provided me with about the September 29th 9 a.m. deadline even being in existence? Well, I guess not expecting this question, she then became very befuddled and, believe it or not, replied with, I think we better move on to another subject. Well, obviously, she couldn't produce one. But I'll share more on that total fiasco of a February 7th, 2011 meeting here in just a little bit later on. But just for now, just still again, but almost done with, this deadline issue. It was in on February 15th of 2011, only 8 days after the February 7th, 2011 meeting I just told you about, that then I then emailed Mr. Mike Perry, CEO of SJVC, and told him about the September 29th 9 a.m. deadline issue, wherein I also requested of him to provide me with a copy of the warning notice that I should have been provided with about this September 29th 9 a.m. deadline issue. However, even Mr. Mike Perry, CEO of SJVC, never responded. But perhaps this is why only 7 days after my February 15th email to Mr. Mike Perry on February 22nd of 2011, that SJVC finally responded through their lawyer to my lawyer via email by requesting of me to please give SJVC an alternative money demand. Why? Because as you'll see clearly here very soon, the truth is that SJVC knew all along that their termination of me was a totally unjustified axe job from the very beginning. all of which eventuated for the express purpose of trying in a very extremely tyrannical fashion to protect their own interest over my academic interest as a student, and they know it. However, because this alternative money demand issue is currently where my case stands at the present moment, I'd like to go ahead now and go back to tell you what the whole reason was for why such a highly inappropriate termination eventuated to begin with. For like I said earlier, at the same time of informing SJVC by way of email September 30th that I had never been informed about any September 29th 9 a.m. deadline, we, meaning me along with my lawyer that I had to immediately retain by this time to protect my interests, had also inquired of SJVC as to what the whole reason was, as to why I was terminated to begin with. For even in SJVC's notice of termination, there was also absolutely no reason given therein as to why I was terminated. However, the only reason SJVC ever gave to my lawyer upon her inquiry over the phone was, they said this verbally, he was being, and I quote, he was being insubordinate. The only thing is that SJV said this while giving absolutely no examples in order to support such a claim. So why couldn't SJVC give any examples? Because there were no examples. In fact, believe it or not, during all my time at SJVC, not once was I ever warned, put on probation, or even so much as ever talked to by anyone about me displaying any kind of behavior, even coming close to insubordination, or for any other negative behavior for that matter. Because you see, I had one of the highest PD, or they call them professional development point ratings, in my class. And never once had I lost a single PD point during all my time at SJVC. Not only that, but even by virtue of the RT program director's own admission, never once had he ever received any negative comments about me during all my 600 hours worth of clinical work that I had performed up to this point. So then, what was the real reason why SJVC terminated me on September 29th of 2010? Well, it was because 3 weeks prior, on September 7th of 2010, that I had submitted by way of email my very first professional letter of complaint to the Dean of Students about there being a tremendous lack of educational quality within the PALS Pediatric Advanced Life Support Healthcare Certification Program within my RT 104 pediatric class. A class which, by the way, like some of my other classes, I had an overall A in at the time. And even though SJVC had originally claimed as part of their sales pitch to get me and students like me, signed up for their program, that they would provide their RT students with more healthcare certifications within their 18-month concentrated program than what many other competing 2 to 3 year college RT programs were even able to provide. I never bargained for or even thought that SJVC would sacrifice the quality of education within any of those healthcare certification classes by way of not covering those topics thoroughly enough. However, that's exactly what was clearly evidenced in not just one, but in several non-quality practices that SJVC had definitely engaged in, and for which I had carefully taken the time to detail in my September 7th letter of complaint. However, of those several non-quality practices, I specifically focused on one of those practices in particular, which SJVC knows very well, especially if revealed and verified, could be the main practice that could very well likely jeopardize their WASC accreditation stamp of approval on SJVC, and thus very serious financial repercussions for them. Specifically, this would be the unscrupulous practice of the teacher actually verbally providing to all the students, verbatim mind you, about all of the 25 PALS examination questions and answers to the written PALS examination test just immediately prior to handing that same test out for the whole class to simply put those same answers down on the test. For not only does SJVC know plainly that such a practice constitutes a commonsensical violation of the integrity wherewith real tests should be administered, but SJVC is also keenly aware of how that such a practice definitely constitutes a major violation of WASC's high-quality educational standards regarding how real tests should be administered with integrity. Not only that, But such testing practices are clearly not even allowed by the American Heart Association, who is the one who created and sponsors the PALS certification test to begin with. And then, when you